Hi, everyone. Welcome to our special guest demonstration with Becca. So today, like Jillian just said, we have Becca here. She is from the Happy Ever Crafter, and you may know her from her famous Show Me Your Drills challenge. So Becca, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, so as you guys are joining live, just let us know that you're here in the comments. And hi, everyone. Just so you know, we can't see your names right now, but still just let us know that you're here watching.
Don't you hate that? I hate this program because you can't, it just says Facebook user. It's like, get your ish together, Facebook.
Yeah. Supposedly they're working on it, so hopefully in the future we'll be able to see your names from here. But anyway, we're so happy that you guys are joining in. Looks like we have some people coming in. So we're going to have a really awesome demo from Becca today. But before we get started with that, we're just going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing in the group and how it kind of relates to what Becca is going to be showing us. So if you guys have been following along with our faux calligraphy series, you've been learning how to write the letters in faux calligraphy. And so we thought it would be fun to bring in another calligrapher to show her awesome technique for using faux calligraphy on some different surfaces. Yeah, so I guess, Becca, if you want to tell us like a little bit about yourself and then maybe some projects that you use faux calligraphy on before we get into the demo.
Yeah, so I have been doing calligraphy for about 3.5 years now, which is crazy because I feel like it was just yesterday I was saying I just started learning, but I learned with faux calligraphy first. I feel like a lot of people do that just like unknowingly as they're growing up. I don't know if you guys did that too, but like I would write a word in cursive in my journal or whatever at school and then like try and thicken parts of it, and it never looked right because I didn't actually know what I was doing. But yeah, so I've been doing calligraphy for about 3.5 years, and I teach it and I do it for clients, and most of the clients that I have are wedding clients, and they're people who want mirrors or chalkboards or pretty glass panes and all that pretty Pinterest stuff you see. So on those, you can't use brush pens, obviously, and you have to use faux calligraphy. But I always teach it, and I'm glad you guys teach it the same way, where you still are writing it out in the basic strokes and then just thickening parts of it, because I feel like as soon as people start doing faux calligraphy, they tend to just forget all the rules about the basic strokes and just write back in cursive, and it doesn't look the same when you add those thicknesses. So I'm excited to talk about that. And a lot of people don't realize that that's what you have to do on mirrors and windows and that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's so important to get that look of calligraphy, to continue thinking about the basics. Even though you might not be using a brush pen or a calligraphy pen, you're still doing calligraphy. So to get that look, it's important to remember the fundamentals. So yeah. One other thing that I think is interesting about doing signs like mirrors and glass, for me, it's easier to use like a paint pen instead of like a paint brush if I'm doing painting on a sign. So even though you could use a brush and kind of mimic the brush calligraphy, or if you know how to do watercolor lettering, I personally think it's a little bit easier to control a paint pen, especially on like a large sign. So you definitely need faux calligraphy for that kind of project.
It is for sure. The only signage I use an actual paintbrush and paint for sometimes is wood, because some woods will like suck the paint right out of the pen and it just bleeds right into the wood. And that really comes with like just practicing on different kinds of wood and stuff. But I've found that using like a thicker acrylic paint with a paintbrush is sometimes the only way to get it to not bleed into certain woods.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the surface. Obviously glass and mirror is much smoother. Maybe a chalkboard might be more textured, but wood is definitely can be absorbent as well. So Becca's going to be giving you guys tons of tips on the supplies that she uses, just tips and tricks that she's learned from doing probably hundreds of signs, right, for clients.
Yes.
Paint pens and all the different supplies that you're going to tell us about. So if you guys have any questions, we'll probably save them towards the end, but feel free to put them in the comments, or if, as we're going, they make sense, then we'll interject.
Yeah, I was going to say, if people are putting questions in that are relevant to exactly what I'm talking about, feel free to interrupt me. That won't throw me off. I'll be okay.
All right. So I guess, is there anything that we wanted to talk about besides that before we actually get into the demo? Can you give us maybe a quick overview of what you're actually going to be showing us?
Yeah, so I have a bunch of tools just kind of scattered around my office all around me because my desk is not very big, but I have a piece of glass, I have a chalkboard, and I have a mirror. And so I'm going to walk you through the different tools I use, so all the different pens, which everybody ask me about all the time on Instagram. So which pens I use for which projects. And then I have all the stuff to remove it as well. So I'll talk through how to put it on there and then how to remove it afterwards when you're done, and why and where to use different pens depending on how easily you need to remove things.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm really excited to learn from you. So we are going to get off the screen here, and then if you want to flip your camera around so that you can show us your work surface, and then whenever you are ready to get started.
Okay, so let me know if I'm off the screen, because I can't really see while I talk, but can you see all my pens right now? Like, can you see both my hands?
We are going to put you on full screen, and yes, now we can see everything.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, perfect. So the first thing, like I said, that I want to talk about is the pens. And, oh, I think is this backwards? Okay. No, I'm good. Okay. So your screen is backwards to mine. That's why this is throwing me off. But I'm going to start over here. And these are Bistro chalk paint pens. Chalk paint pens. So these are great for chalkboards, obviously, but they're also great for drawing guidelines because they remove really easily. You don't have to use Windex or anything to get them off. You can just use a clean paper towel to wipe them off. So I'm going to talk more about these and all the rest of these as I show you in the projects, but Bistro paint pens. And these are kind of in order of how easy they are to remove. So Bistro is the easiest. And then I move on to Posca pens. Posca is like a really great bright white paint pen. And it obviously comes in other colors too, but I'm going to show you with white for the purposes of today, because that's what I use 99.9% of the time. So Posca comes in all different sizes of tips. And these are just kind of the most standard ones that I use. And I'll talk to you about those exact sizes later. But Posca is a water-based pen, so it removes a little bit harder than chalk pens, but a little bit easier than oil paint pens. So I use Windex to remove these, and they're fairly easy to remove, but they're also a little bit better to stay on a surface a bit longer than chalk pens. So if you run your finger across it, it won't come smudging off like a chalk pen would. And then the next one is Sharpie oil or Sharpie water-based pen. So this is similar to Posca, but it stays on a little bit longer and it's a little bit sturdier. So Sharpie is kind of my go-to all the time. Posca is like once in a while. I'll use this if I have an appropriate surface, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. But my go-to is Sharpie, and I use Bistro for guidelines. So these are kind of what's always in my kit. And so after water-based Sharpie, you have oil-based Sharpie. And this one is definitely the sturdiest. It'll stay on the longest. And it's got kind of the brightest white color, and it'll be the most long-lasting. So I use this on things that clients don't necessarily want to remove or that they want to stay on for as long as possible. Does that all make sense so far? Okay, I can see you guys nodding, even though the people on the live can't see you. So perfect. Okay, so these are supplies. These are the pens. But now if we're going to talk about how to remove things from surfaces, I'll just move these out of the way. So obviously paper towel is always in my kit, and that's what I use to remove everything. But what I put on the paper towel differs a little bit. So if I'm going to remove something fairly easy, I have Windex in my kit all the time. And then for things that are going to be on there sturdier, I have nail polish remover, or you could just get straight acetone if you want to do that as well. And then there's two other things that I've found recently that I haven't talked about much on social media or anything, but these are great options for a couple reasons. So Easy Strip, I just found this at the hardware store recently, and I didn't know it existed, but I figured I'd pick it up and try it. And it seems like it's a little bit more eco-friendly, which is nice because acetone is not. And also it takes off my nail polish when I'm working, which is horrible. But this Easy Strip stuff is really good, and it takes off a lot. It's kind of an all-purpose remover. So it was in the paint section. It can definitely remove paint. So I've been using this to take off all the sturdy oil paint. And then the other one is Kiss Off, and Kiss Off is actually a clothing stain remover. So on the demo things, it shows it taking stains off clothes, but it talks about how it removes oil paint, grease, makeup, blood, lipstick, coffee, blah, blah, blah. None of those other things apply to us, but it removes oil paint. So if you are using a surface like, what's it called? Acrylic. Acrylic doesn't respond well to harsh cleaners like acetone. So if you are using acrylic, which I'm not going to demonstrate today, but a lot of you probably know what it is, Kiss Off apparently works really well. So you put this on paper towel and then you just use that on top of the oil paint and it'll take it off of acrylic without damaging the acrylic, which is great. So those are my removers. And then the last...
A quick question before while we're talking about removers. So do you use removers when you make a mistake and you need to remove something, or at the end so that you can reuse whatever sign you're working on?
So all of the above. I generally will have paper towel and all of these things available to me as I work, because especially with oil paint and the paints that dry really, really quickly, the faster you can get rid of that mistake, the better. So I'll generally have some Q-tips and some paper towel that's already ready, that I know if I'm going to make a mistake, I can remove it right away. And as far as Windex goes, this won't work super well to remove things quickly. So even if I'm using chalk paint or water-based paint where I could remove it with Windex, my standard is to have a Q-tip dipped in acetone right there and ready, because it'll get it off really quickly. So yeah, I use this both for mistakes and for removing it afterwards. And then the one last thing for removal, and this only applies to removing after the project is done, but I have this paint scraper. So you can use a paint scraper or something that has a sharp edge like this. Sometimes if you leave the oil paint on, especially for a long time, it can get really hard to rub off. So you can use acetone on it, it'll kind of smudge it, but until you actually like get in there and scrape it off, it doesn't really come off that easily. So this is a really handy tool. And I've seen people using razor blades as well, but I've cut myself with those too many times and I am not interested in using them. So paint scraper is great for me. But that's it for removal stuff. And then I have a couple other like tips and tricks up my sleeve for tools that I use. And I just have to lean over here and grab them. Okay, so like I said, I use Q-tips. So I always have these in my kit. I think everybody knows what a Q-tip is. And then a couple other things that I sometimes use for drawing guidelines. I said I use chalk pens, and I do most of the time, but there's also this really handy pencil called the Stabilo All or the Stabilo Aquarellable, depending how fancy you feel like talking. But this Stabilo pencil is used for all kinds of different surfaces. So paper, glass, plastic, metal, they all work with this. And this is really great for drawing guidelines as well, that you can just easily rub off with a paper towel at the end. And then every once in a while, I'll use this Faber-Castell pastel pencil. And it's really good on chalkboards too. So I'll use this, or even a chalk pencil that just goes on really nice and thick on chalkboards. So those are two other things I sometimes use on my kits. And if anybody's in Australia and can manage to find these painty twin pens, or even if you're not in Australia, you're somewhere else in the world that has them, I just know that Canada doesn't, and I've been dying to find more, because they just have a really nice small tip on it. And sometimes Sharpie is a little bit too thick. So if I'm using really, really tiny writing on anything, this is a really good pen. I just don't like to advertise that I use it that much, because I can't recommend for people where to buy it. I have no idea. So if anybody knows and is listening to this, put it in the comments and let us know.
Sounds like the pen we need. We love all the twin tones and all the other twin tips.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And then the last thing is this painter's tape. So sometimes if I don't want to be using guidelines, if I'm feeling lazy one day and don't want to draw out a million guidelines, or if I'm just doing a couple big words, I'll use painter's tape instead. Or if I'm doing block letters, painter's tape is really great, because if you have painter's tape laid down, you can't write over it to do any fancy descenders or anything of calligraphy. But with block letters, painter's tape is fantastic, and it won't damage your surfaces. So I think that's it for supplies, unless anybody has tossed any questions in the comments so far.
No questions about supplies. Remember, you guys can put your questions if you have any. Otherwise, we'll keep moving forward.
Oh, and I forgot to mention chalk. You could use chalk if you want. Every time I bend over to grab something, I have to take my headphones out. So you might hear my sound kind of screwing up. But I use Crayola anti-dust chalk. It's rare that I use actual chalk on chalkboards because it doesn't stay on very well. So unless I'm doing like a really elaborate design that requires shadowing and shading and stuff, I stick with chalk pens. But if you're doing some fancy stuff where you need some nice colors, this dustless anti-dust chalk is nice. So that's just Crayola. But I'm not going to demonstrate with that today because first of all, it makes a mess. And second of all, like I said, I don't use it that often. So we'll put that aside for now. And okay, I'm going to let you guys decide which surface we should do first, mirror, glass, or chalk.
Well, someone just asked if you're gonna show us how to write on a mirror, so let's start with mirror.
Okay, let's do mirror. Give me one sec here. Okay, so now you're going to see my camera awkwardly in this reflection, but we'll just try and ignore that. And I'm putting my headphones back in. So this is just like a crappy mirror I got at Michael's, but it's good for demonstration purposes. So like I said, on a mirror, I would generally be using Sharpie oil paint, and that's kind of the default that I go to just because it stays on quite a bit longer. But you could also use the water-based paints or the Posca paints. So any of these is fine. What is going to be the deciding factor is how concerned the client is with their mirror getting scratched. If you happen to have a client that's got like an antique mirror or something that they don't ever want to potentially have a little scratch on, you might not want to use oil paint because, like I said, sometimes it requires some elbow grease and some scraping to get it off. So if you have an antique mirror, I would probably stick with water-based. But the flip side to that is that it comes off easily. So not easily, but easier. So if your client also is concerned about maybe having it outdoors or potentially having it damaged in transit, you might want to reconsider. So it's kind of a good thing to mention to your clients right off the bat if you're talking to them about which paint they might want you to use. But generally, like I said, my default is oil. So I'm going to put that water-based pen aside. And then I only use this huge one if I'm doing a huge sign. So I'm not going to use that one either. These are kind of my go-tos. So I would use these, and then I'm going to use a chalk marker for guidelines. So I take a ruler, which I have on the floor. One sec. So I use either this triangle, which interestingly is actually called a set square, which has never made sense to me, but if anybody knows where that comes from, I'd love to know. So this is really great because you can line it up right on the edge of your mirror and you can draw your guidelines completely straight. And so I would take actually before I write, I should know what I'm writing. What do you guys want me to write? Give me like a suggestion of words.
Comments or maybe something fall related because is today no, fall already happened, right? Maybe like happy fall.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to do, maybe I'll do one word in block letters and one word in faux calligraphy so that I can show you kind of the different ways I could do that. So if I was going to write happy in block letters, I would probably make a mark on my mirror with the chalk pen and just kind of bring it out as big as I would want it. And then carry those lines over. And so you could either do this with a chalk marker or you could do it with the painter's tape, like I said, but just for purposes of time here, I'm gonna do it with my chalk marker. I'm super cramped here on my desk, but. So I've got these guidelines and this ruler is not long enough. So you'll just have to bear with me as I draw these guidelines. The other kind of ruler you could use, I've showed this one on Instagram before. It looks like this, and it's a lot longer. So this is the same thing. You just line up this part with the edge of your mirror, and you can draw those straight lines across. So you could use that one if you have a really big mirror, but this is fine for now. So I've got those.
Following her on Instagram, I'm just putting her handle up on the screen. She's the happy ever crafter on Instagram. You should follow her.
Yes. So, okay, somehow I just dropped another one. Okay, so I've got my medium point oil-based Sharpie, and I'm just gonna write happy. So you can use those guidelines as the top and the bottom. And generally what I try to do, and I didn't do it here because I wasn't thinking and I was talking while I wrote it, but generally I try to stay like a millimeter under that guideline. And you'll see when we try to erase the chalk later, sometimes the oil paint will dry into the corners and it'll kind of smudge a little bit. So if you go right under the guideline or above the guideline and don't touch it, it actually generally works out a little bit better. So on that A, I won't be touching it, and you guys will be able to see the difference. I'm also just going to casually tell everybody that I am probably not doing my very best lettering as I'm talking here, but hopefully the material demos will be more useful than my actual lettering skills at the moment. So I would write happy, and then if you wanted to do some sort of faux calligraphy rule, you could go back and thicken those lines wherever your downstrokes were. The only thing I would mention here is if you were going to do that, the smarter move would have been to thicken it as you go. And I get that question a lot, and I'll talk about it in a minute as I write the next word. But if you thicken the lines as you go, there's no chance of the paint drying on you and getting kind of chunky, which will start to happen if you let it dry for too long in between. Right now it seems okay. I guess I just had enough paint on my marker that it wasn't a problem, but sometimes you'll notice that and you'll hear people talking about Sharpie markers getting streaky, and that's what they're referring to. So that's how I would write happy in block letters. And then if I was gonna do a faux calligraphy word fall underneath it, for the purposes of this, I'll just demonstrate with a different type of guideline. So if I use that Stabilo Aquarellable pencil instead of the chalk marker, and I wrote underneath here, I can just draw my guidelines on. I'm going to do a waistline and a baseline. Or sorry, an ascender and a waistline and a baseline. So I would write my F. So you can draw this with this pencil as a guideline if you want to. You don't have to go straight into the oil paint. A lot of people want to be able to have a guideline, and this is a really good tool to use for that. And then I take my marker, and you should be able to go right on top. So I would draw my letter, and F is not a good one for demonstrating basic strokes because I kind of modernize my F, but if you watch what I'm doing, I'm thickening those downstrokes for the faux calligraphy as we go, because otherwise you'll notice the paint drying. So I don't think I need to be walking through all of these basic strokes because it sounds like you guys have been doing faux calligraphy all month, and I think most people that are watching know what's going on as I add these thicknesses.
Yeah, so that's a really good tip to that you said that you're adding the shade as you go, because as we've been talking about faux calligraphy, we've, like you said, thickened the downstrokes, but as we're learning, we tell our students they can either do it as they go or kind of write it all out and then at the end add the shading, as long as they're leaving enough space for the shading. So that's really important that you pointed that out for paint pens, to do it as you go.
Yeah, so I also do that normally when I'm just doing normal faux calligraphy with pens. I add the thicknesses as I go because I find otherwise when you go to add them, it gets too cramped. Mm-hmm. So, or even when I'm teaching faux calligraphy, I tell people to kind of adjust their basic strokes and make them a little wider than they normally would, because then it leaves you the room to add the thicknesses in. So I'm not going to erase these guidelines yet because my paint is not dry. So you don't want to go erasing it before the paint is dry. And it does dry pretty quickly. But unless anyone has other questions about mirrors, that's pretty much standard for what I would do on here. And again, I did that with oil paint. So I'm going to leave this aside till it's dry. And then when I come back, I'll be able to show you guys how to remove it. Perfect. So next up, do we want chalk or glass?
I think someone asked about a chalkboard next, so let's do the chalkboard.
Okay.
I think we have really good questions. Do we have any ideas for a word that we can write? Yeah, the first person who comes up with a really quick short phrase that she can write on the chalkboard, we'll let her know.
Sorry, say that again. I didn't have my headphones in.
Oh, we're just seeing what people want you to write on this chalkboard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And
yeah.
Just remember there's a little bit of a delay between when you say a comment and when you see it, so we'll wait just a second. Oh yeah, can you remind us what the second pencil you used to create the guidelines for the mirror was?
Yeah, so it's the Stabilo, Stabilo, Aqua Reliable, or you can just put in Stabilo all, and usually that will come up too. Yeah, that's like a really, really good pencil for drawing guidelines, and you can use that on any of the surfaces that we're talking about today. So for the chalkboard, as I mentioned at the beginning, you could either use actual chalk pens, or you can use water-based pens, and Posca is great for that because it's a little bit stronger than a chalk pen, but a little bit less than a Sharpie. So I'm not going to use these chalk markers for this because I find that they rub off really easily. But if you're working for a client who wants something really temporary and doesn't really want it to stay on for very long, then chalk markers are totally fine, and they're cheap and they make a really nice bright white color. So that's what I would use those for. But for this, I'm going to use Posca. So Posca has some really awesome size tips on them. This one happens to be my favorite. It's the 0.7 millimeters, and it's bullet shaped. So I don't know if you can see how kind of chiseled that is at the end. Like it can have a really sharp, fine tip on it. And then it comes in a bunch of other sizes. So I use like a combination of all these different sizes. And I kind of just go crazy in the art store whenever I see Posca and buy a bunch of these. So, and then this chalkboard is actually not like your typical classroom chalkboard. It's not one of those ones that needs to be seasoned. It's kind of the ones you find in the art store that are a little bit more plasticky. And I think everybody pretty much knows what I'm talking about when I say that. But all the techniques I'm going to show you will apply to a regular chalkboard as well. So, and the same goes for the materials. So I'm going to use a combo of these chalk pens, or Posca pens. And you guys have to tell me what you want me to write.
Yep, so we just put it on the screen. We want you to write, "You are enough."
Okay. Okay, so I actually want to show you guys one of my favorite tricks for chalkboards. And this is something that I think a lot of people might feel like is cheating, but I am giving you permission and I'm telling you that this is not cheating. So I have a Rhodia grid pad here, and I'm going to grab, I had a brush pen somewhere. Give me 1 second. It's on the floor. Okay. So I have a brush pen, or you could just use your faux calligraphy skills. And is this really bright?
It's pretty washed out. I don't know if you can adjust it.
There we go.
That's better, yeah.
Better? Okay. So take your grid pad and all this, and this is just going to cut out like 20 steps of trying to lay things out on your chalkboard. And so what I would do is write down, what am I writing? You are enough?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to do it all in calligraphy, and I'm just doing it with a brush pen to make things quick, but you could do this with your faux calligraphy as well.
So we're using a Tomo dual brush right now.
Yes.
We just saw that the new colored Tomo for the Nosuke's came out today.
Yes, and they're sold out already.
Oh my gosh. Hopefully you guys in the comments were able to order yours.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I'm sure they'll get more soon because they realize how much people wanted them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was wild all morning just seeing the comments and everything roll in.
So I see a question, what are you writing on? So right now she's writing on, it's just a piece of paper. It's a Rhodia grid pad. And can you explain again why you're writing it on paper first?
Yeah, so I always just assume that people know Rhodia, but Rhodia is a really great paper to use with brush pens or whatever pens. It's just not going to wreck your brush pens. And you're going to see why I'm writing it on here first in just 1 second. So this is just cutting out having to do all the guidelines on your chalkboard, and it's kind of a trick that I've picked up. You can't do it on mirrors, which is why I didn't show you it on mirrors, but on chalkboards, it's fantastic. So I've written this word that I want and take the paper out. And now I'm going to take some regular chalk, and I'm actually going to move my chalkboard out of the way so I don't get dust all over it. But I'm taking this wording and I'm going to go on the back and just draw chalk onto it. And you can be as dainty as you want with this and only go over the words that you wrote, or you can kind of rub chalk everywhere. Sometimes I'll put it up on a window so I can actually see through the page and only write on the letters. But for right now, just add some chalk on the back, brush off the dust, and then you're going to take your chalkboard again, place your words wherever you want them on the chalkboard, and you can secure it down with tape if you want to, but I kind of just hold it on here. And then take a regular pencil, which I have to reach for, and you're going to draw over your words. So you could either be careful with it like I am right now and go over all of the kind of outside perimeter of things, or you could take a pencil and kind of go like just rub across the whole thing. But I find this way is better because then you don't get all the like residual chalk all over the place and doesn't make a huge mess. This just might take me a minute. So as I'm doing this, if you guys have other questions that you want me to talk about, or if people are asking.
Some comments in the group saying that this is excellent so far and that you're sharing lots of great tips, which we agree.
Awesome. I'm glad. I feel like what I'm doing right now, a lot of people consider to be cheating and to not be doing it like properly and learning how to write on a chalkboard, which I don't agree with because you are using your own writing and you're transferring it yourself. I just find that this makes things so much faster when you're doing a big job because you can plan it out on paper first instead of having to draw in all the chalk guidelines and then go out and erase them. And especially on a chalkboard where if you're actually using chalk or if you're using chalk markers that rub off really easily, you don't want to have to be going in and erasing guidelines and stuff because you run the risk of erasing all of your actual work. So I find this technique really, really, really helpful.
So hopefully you guys are noticing as she's tracing over this, even though she wrote it with a brush pen, the outlines are the exact same thing that you guys do in faux calligraphy. So if you wanted to write in faux calligraphy or brush pen for your, I guess, first draft of this before you transfer it, either one will work. Are you guys noticing that? Can you see how this is all fitting together?
I think as soon as I lift up this paper, you're going to see exactly where all of those faux calligraphy techniques come in.
Okay, so someone just says, when I did a chalkboard, I had to keep erasing it and rewriting it so many times. So hopefully this tip is going to help you next time.
Yes, yes.
Becca, I do have a question. I've seen other people recommend that you first season a chalkboard before writing on that. Do you ever do that where you just like put some chalk dust on the back and wipe it off first?
So if I'm using like a chalkboard that is the actual chalkboard surface, sometimes I'll do that. But really what that's for is so you can go in and add shadowing and stuff. So if I wanted to put like little shadows around my letters, that's why I would season it. And you can do it on these plasticky ones too. But generally if I'm doing like signs for weddings, though they don't require the seasoning part. But yeah, you can do that for sure. And I actually did an interview with Val of Lily and Val recently on my YouTube channel, who's like the chalk master. And she talked a little bit about that. So if anybody's interested in seeing that in action, it's on there too. But I'm going to lift this up. And so now you can see, I don't know how well you can see that. Can you see it at all?
We can kind of see a faint outline.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, that looks.
There we go. Whoa. Yeah. So now the chalk is transferred onto the board, and all you have to do is go and fill it in with your markers. So sometimes, I don't know how well you can see here, but there's a little bit of extra chalk just because I was messy with applying it. So I'll go in with a Q-tip before I write and just kind of clean it up so that I don't have to go through afterwards and run the risk of erasing my work. So I just kind of take off some of the dust. And again, you can be as delicate with that as you want to be, but I'm generally just a messy person, so I don't take too much time. And then one thing I forgot to mention as we were going through this is that I generally keep like a plasticky surface near me so that I can constantly be depressing the tip of these pens so that there's always a lot of paint on them. I just don't have one. Oh yeah, here we go. This is just, I'm going to get everything I own that is plasticky has paint marks on it. So this is like my nib set, but I'll just use this. So I'm like, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a puddle of paint right here. And so I am not afraid to have puddles of paint all over this stuff and really keep this marker wet. You just want to make sure that it's not dripping when you go to put it onto your surface. But a lot of people are, I think, scared to waste ink and don't want to have puddles like that, but it works really well so that your stuff isn't streaky. So I'm going to just start going through and filling this in. And again, I add the shades as I'm going.
So someone asked if you've ever written on slate and what the prep would be for that.
So slate would be really similar to chalkboards. I don't have a ton of experience with it, but I have used it for place cards before, like these little, they were, what are they called? Coasters, slate coasters that I've written on. And so I don't actually prep them like I would a chalkboard unless you are going to do all the shading and stuff. So it's generally the exact same prep as you would for a chalkboard. This slate is really, really similar.
So writing over the dust like that doesn't ruin your pen at all?
No, it doesn't. No. If you are using, like if you're not using the actual chalk and pencil, if you're using something that makes a little more dust, or if you're using like different pencils that are, like sometimes the Stabilo Aquarellable will be a little bit waxy and it'll kind of affect the consistency of your paint. So you kind of just have to play with those things and get to know them. But I found that this works. This works the best.
So guys, as she's going, make sure you're watching how she's forming these letters, like how she's putting together her basic strokes, like that A. Perfect.
The basic strokes are my jam. Although I do change them up a little bit when I'm doing these like modern calligraphy words. But yeah, the basic strokes are like my bread and butter. Love them. And I feel like people are getting a lot more acquainted with them these days. Like I feel like when we started, there weren't people teaching them. Everybody was kind of just teaching their own style, and they weren't going through the basic strokes with the beginners, which was really hard to navigate when you're teaching people because everybody's learned someone else's style instead of their own.
Yeah, and everyone just wants to jump to the end result of being able to write beautiful letters without first setting a solid foundation. I think of it kind of like a good analogy is maybe like music, where you can't just, I mean, you could learn how to play a whole song on the guitar, but then you can't learn the next song because you don't know the actual chords or like how to read music. So really going back to the basics is so helpful to.
I think I've actually used that exact analogy before. But yeah, it's so true. And I've also used the classic Canadian analogy of like going to hockey practice. Learning how to skate and learning how to like stick handle before you try and, you know, write the actual words. I just mix those two metaphors together, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
All right. You are enough. And that's it. There's nothing really, I mean, there's a little bit, where did my Q-tip go? There's a little bit of the chalk guideline here in the back, and you can get rid of it. But like you see, I just kind of smudged that. I don't know if you can see that, but because it wasn't fully dry yet, I smudged it. So we're going to just pretend that that was on purpose and that I was just trying to illustrate something. But yeah, you can go back and really gently get rid of the chalk guidelines afterwards and just kind of perfect things. And then, yeah, if you had seasoned it earlier, you could go and add in some shading and stuff like that. But that's pretty much all I would do on chalkboards. It's rare anymore that I would actually draw guidelines and do that kind of stuff on chalkboards, just because this transfer method is so easy. And if you can make your sketch really perfect, it's kind of flawless to put it onto your chalkboard. So that's chalkboards.
Can we get some clap emojis in the comments or some thank yous for that awesome chalkboard? So she has one more. So if you guys have any ideas for what she should write on this last surface, drop them in the comments now, and then she'll start talking about what surface she's doing next.
Okay, so be nice to me. Make it short and simple. So I just got pen all over, so you're going to see through it because now I'm doing glass. So this is just like a crappy glass frame that I found, and it still has like some sticky sticker stuff on here. So we're just going to pretend this is a nice piece of clean glass. But on this one, I'm going to also use Sharpie, but I want to use the oil or the water-based Sharpie just to illustrate when we're removing it, how different it can be. So this is the water-based one. And like I said, you can remove this one with Windex and it won't stay on quite as long as the oil paint would. So if I were doing this for a client, I probably would use oil, but because I want to demonstrate all the different ones, we'll use water. So same exact thing for glass is you can skip a step and you don't have to be doing all these guidelines because of course you can see through it. So if I were to write a word, did anybody give any recommendations yet?
Well, someone said thank you for the demo, but I think that would be a really good word to write. Either thanks or thank you. Yeah, I thought
thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do thank you. So I'm going to get out my Rhodia paper again and my brush pen if I can find where I put it. And I'm going to write thank you. So just do this right on, well, first of all, you want to know how big your surface is. So I would probably give myself a little guideline here. But if you're doing like a lot of people for weddings these days want those big glass window panes and stuff like that, or those doors that have like 10 different window panes in them and just put one seating, like for a seating chart, they'll put one table per pane. You can literally cut paper the size of each of those panes, write on it, and then stick it on the back and trace right through. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to write thank you on here.
So I'm putting this back up on the screen for you guys. Tracing your own lettering is not cheating. It's just a super helpful tip to be able to work smarter instead of working harder. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Especially when you are working on big signs that, like if someone wants a seating chart, for example, and they want the all the tables to be centered. So you're writing like 10 names and you want it to be center justified. It's really hard to do that in paint pen while being perfect and not smudging and all these things on top of trying to do the layout properly. So if you can write it out on paper first and perfect it and use your eraser and move things around and then stick it to the back, it's so much easier. So I'm going to put this over top, center it however I want, and then I think you guys get the idea. So again, same thing, I would have a surface nearby, and this is especially true for Sharpies. I find that they can dry up really quickly. So if you can have like a nice pool of paint on the side, it's really helpful to avoid the streakiness. So
someone asked a question that sounds pretty specific. They said, I've seen you use large T-shaped straight edges on your mirrors. I don't know if you could demonstrate that now, but how does that work if your frame is in the way?
Okay, so yeah, you kind of have to make do with what you can when your frame's in the way. So I'll demonstrate that in a second if I can. My ruler is really big. It's the one I showed you guys earlier that like rests on the side of the page. But basically the short answer to that is that I use a combination of that and this triangle. So I'll use the T-square where I can, or T-square, I think is what it's called. I should know that. I learned that in school. I'll use a combination. So and I also have different sizes of them. So I play around with the different sizes of them, and sometimes some will fit better within your frame than others. And so, okay, can you guys see how this is starting to get streaky on that A?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you can see through it. So that's where I would try and have this like pool of paint to go back to. So I'll even like hold my pen down for a second and let it all bleed out so that as I carry on, I have enough paint on here. And that's one of the most common things I hear people talking about with Sharpies. They'll say that they're too streaky, but generally it's just because you haven't had enough paint on your pen, or you've tried to go back and add the shades after it's dry. So as long as you're adding the shades as you go, you shouldn't have that streaky issue.
Yeah, and you had mentioned this earlier about like, don't be afraid to create that pool of paint. Like, don't be afraid that you're wasting paint, because would you rather have to redo your entire spine because it was streaky, or just use a little extra paint as you're going?
Exactly. I order Sharpies in bulk.
Oh, that's actually, I was kind of wondering, so how many, like if you were doing one of those big table signs that you were talking about, would that take a whole pen?
It generally doesn't, but the problem with Sharpies that I find is if you leave them sitting like in a box or whatever for too long, like even a week, you have to really shake them really hard to get the ink to start working again. And generally, if I've used a pen for a whole project, the tip of it becomes a little more dull. Like it's just not quite as sharp and doesn't make quite as nice of a block letter. So I generally use a new Sharpie for every seating chart or every wedding sign that I do. But that's not because I use the whole thing up. The other thing that I can't tell, I don't know if you guys can tell on here, is I just bought this frame yesterday, and I cleaned it off today with Goo Gone because it had a sticker on it. Do you guys have Goo Gone in the States?
Yeah, I think so. Or some equivalent.
So this is Goo Gone, and it takes off like crappy stickers that they put on frames or whatever. Like when you take off the sticker, the price tag, and it's like still goopy underneath, this will take that off. But because I used that on here to get a sticker off earlier, my paint is not sitting perfectly on it. So normally I would, if I had time, I would have stopped earlier and gone over this with just water and a paper towel. But because we're sort of on a short schedule here, you might be able to tell that some of the edges are a little bit bleedy. Can you see that? I don't know if you can, but anyway, that's how I would do a glass. And same, it would go for no matter what size glass I'm doing. I generally just will take normal 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper and like tape them together and then use that to write my plan and then stick it on the back and trace right through. It's just the easiest thing ever. But like I said, I think a lot of people consider it cheating, and I don't agree. So I give you all permission to do that. Okay, so now we're getting into the erasing phase. So I'm going to go back to my mirror, my initial mirror. If I can grab it off the floor.
How are you guys liking this so far? Let us know in the comments if you're learning lots of new things. And I'm excited to see this part too about all the erasing and everything, because I think it's an important thing to remember that you don't only just need good supplies to write everything with, but you need a way to get it off. So,
okay, so on this one, if you remember, we used the chalk marker and oil paint pen, and then we used the Stabilo pencil and oil paint pen. So it should all be dry. I'm going to cross my fingers that I don't embarrass myself here. I would normally let it dry a little longer. But now as you go right over this, you can just wipe off the chalk and the oil paint stays. And it's like the most satisfying thing in the world. Every time I do this on Instagram, I have a million questions about it. But the one part I want to point out is, remember earlier when I said you want to try not to touch your chalk marker with your oil marker? So I don't know if I can zoom in close enough on that H. Do you see at the bottom of the H how there's little notches on it? Like right here at the bottom of that H. That's because I touched the chalk pen to the oil pen. So try to stay within the guidelines and not touch them. But if you do have that issue, you can just go in with something sharp like the tip of this chisel and just kind of chisel away at it and just perfect it. So it's not undoable, but it's kind of annoying if you have a really big seating chart or anything and you have to do that on every word. So just be careful of that. And then the same thing for that Stabilo pencil, it'll wipe right off. It doesn't wipe off quite as easily as chalk marker, but it also doesn't leave you with those little edges. Oh, see, my paint wasn't fully dry. It doesn't leave you with those little edges if you run over it like the chalk pen would. So it kind of has its payoffs and its downfalls. Takes a little more erasing, but it's better for guidelines sometimes. And you can use that on any of the surfaces that we've been working with today. So that's how I would erase that. So this is what I would give the client afterwards. It's all guidelines erased and everything. But say the client was done with it, they gave it back, and they were keeping it themselves and wanted to be able to erase this. Oil paint will come off with, like I said, acetone. So this is just nail polish remover, and I'll just use the same paper towel. So just get that wet and it'll come off right away. and it kind of muddies up your mirror a little bit. So you'll have to take another paper towel. And then generally once I've gotten to about this stage, I'll use Windex directly on it and just back to normal. Now, if you had left that on for a really long time, this might be a good example. So there's a little speck right here. I don't know if you can see it. Mm-hmm. That's oil paint. And it must have been just a thicker layer than everything else, and I missed it. So I would use the scraper. So you can put a little bit of Windex on it again, and then just use the scraper really gently. As long as you're not like using the edges of it and scratching the mirror. If you have it flat along there, it won't actually scratch your mirror, and it comes off really easily. So that's it for mirrors. Anybody have questions about that removal stuff?
Yeah, lots of comments on how satisfying that was and how inspirational this is and how awesome these tips are. So thank you again for sharing these, and how nerve-wracking it must be to erase all your guidelines after everything and hope that you did it right.
Well, I'm telling you, after the first time you've done it, it's just satisfying. It's not nerve-wracking anymore. You're like, oh my God, I can't wait for this step.
It's like peeling the painter's tape off after you paint a wall, yeah?
Yes, yes. So back to the chalkboard now. This, like I said, is water-based pen, so it will come off a little bit easier. So I'm going to try and see if it sort of depends on what your background is. Sometimes you can get it off with just a dry paper towel. So if I were to rub on that, and if I do it for long enough, I could probably get it off with just this. You just have to kind of put some elbow grease into it. But the easiest way is to just Windex it. And that's it for removing water-based. And so that will go for, if you use water-based pens on mirrors or windows, the same thing, like Windex or just a little bit of, muscle will get it out. So water-based is really safe if you're using materials or surfaces that you're kind of scared that you might damage if you're trying to take off really harsh oil paint afterwards. So that's it for chalkboards.
If you were doing a chalkboard sign, maybe that would go outdoors at a wedding. Would you use oil-based?
Yes, I would use oil-based, yeah. And you can take it off with, I'm just trying to adjust the exposure here. You can take it off with acetone as well. But the one problem with that is that sometimes if you're using, how some people will make a chalkboard themselves and like it'll just be a piece of wood with chalk paint over top. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you can't remove oil paint from chalk paint because otherwise you're going to take off the whole chalk paint background. So you kind of have to get to know those surfaces. And if you know that your client is giving you a homemade chalkboard and they want you to write on it, you have to just tell them to be aware that once you are done with it, you're going to have to repaint it with chalk paint because you can't remove paint from chalk paint. Does that make sense?
Yeah, good tip.
Yeah. And then the last removal is the glass. And this one, again, was water-based. So this should come off pretty easily with just elbow grease again. So this is maybe not, no, it's not fully dry. So it's just going to smudge. But if you were to run your finger, like scratch it, it would come off as opposed to oil paint that would have stayed on nice and strong. So if you're using water-based, just be aware that it comes off pretty easily. And since it's not fully dry yet, I can probably just get it all off with a dry paper towel. So it would come off pretty easily, but I'm just lazy and we don't have all day. So here we go. Windex it is. Or if you don't have Windex, just use your paint scraper. Lots of different options. So I generally will have all of these removal options in my kit at all times, just because you never know what's going to happen when you try to remove something. But pretty much without fail, the acetone will always get things off if you're having trouble. You just need to be aware that it might damage other paint surfaces that you're on. But I think that's it.
Yeah, awesome tips. I can tell, we can all tell that this isn't your first time doing this. You've done this, or you've picked up these tips over time, things that you just learned from doing by experience. So we're really grateful that you shared all these tips and saved us all some time. And now we know what markers to use for different scenarios and how to take them off and everything. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
My pleasure.
If you guys have any questions that she hasn't covered, feel free to put them in the comments right now, just so she can answer them while we have her here live with us. Seeing lots of positive feedback here. So while we're waiting for any questions to roll in, we know you have an exciting program coming up starting October 1st, which is Monday already. I can't believe how quickly September went. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so, well, I feel like we probably share a lot of the same audience members. So there are probably people in here who have heard me talking about Show Me Your Drills like nonstop recently. But Show Me Your Drills is my free program to learn calligraphy. And if you have only learned the faux calligraphy, then you probably have never tried it with a brush pen. And that's kind of what we're going for in Show Me Your Drills. So I teach you all of the basic strokes that you probably have a great foundation on from these girls. And we go through just the basic strokes for a whole month. So it's a bunch of people all trying to learn together and holding each other accountable. And you get free workbooks and step-by-step videos and all that stuff. It's just a free online course, basically, to teach you the basics. And then once the basics are over, then I have a series of more advanced workbooks that we can go through and kind of just take you from zero to calligraphy pro.
Yeah, so if you guys have been doing Filial Calligraphy, it ends Monday and Show Me Your Drills starts Monday. So doing Show Me Your Drills is going to be an awesome way to continue practicing with other people, solidify your own basics that you might have learned. So we highly encourage you guys to check that out if you're interested. So I have the link up here. Just let them know how they can sign up.
Oh, yeah. So the link is on the screen. But I love how perfectly that lined up. Like we did not plan for yours to end and mine to start, but it's so good. Perfect. Yeah, so if anybody wants to join, it's just showmeyourdrills.com. And between now and Monday, there's already some of the online content in the course. So you can find out, I have a whole supplies guide of what you should be finding and why you should choose certain pens and that kind of stuff. And then some walkthroughs of the basics before we actually get started on Monday.
Awesome. Let's see if we have any questions if you guys have questions about what she went over today or questions about Show Me Your Drills, we'll just spend maybe a minute or two on that. Someone just wants to know what exactly is seasoning a chalkboard.
Okay, so seasoning a chalkboard would be, should I just do a quick demo? How much time do we have here?
Yeah, we got time.
Okay, let me put my camera back on my hands. Okay. Is that upside down? No, that's good, right?
Looks good.
That's good. Okay, let me grab my chalkboard again. I'm just gonna do like a really quick portion of it. If I did the whole thing, it would take a while. But basically, seasoning a chalkboard would be taking a piece of chalk and rubbing it all over. And then you just take a clean paper towel and clean it off. So now your chalkboard is a little bit dulled out and it's got some dust on it. And like I said, if you are actually interested in doing chalk calligraphy, definitely go watch the tutorial that Val of Lily and Val did on my YouTube channel, thehappyevercrafter.tv, because she went over this all in depth and she is like the master. But basically you're just spreading dust onto your board. And then when you go to write with your chalk, what should I write? I'm just going to write high for now because it's fast. And then you add your thicknesses. So that's really messy, but you get the idea. And then what you can do is take an eraser and you can actually use the chalk in the background to give you some shadows. So this is a really quick and dirty example, but hopefully you can see that. Can you see that shadow on the H?
How cool is that?
Yeah,
That's amazing. It really pops out.
Yeah, so this is like one of the coolest easy tricks you can do. Make yourself really look like a pro when you're doing chalk letters. And it makes your lettering really pop. And also just like illustrations. If you follow Val of Lily and Val, she does a lot of this. And it looks so, so good. So yeah, you can't do that obviously if you haven't seasoned your chalkboard, but that's pretty much the gist of it. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that's amazing. And there is one more question. So when you are doing signage for clients, do they typically provide the sign or do you include it as part of your package?
I get this question a lot, and I like to encourage people to not panic if they're trying to start a business doing this and don't have all this stock of different signage, or just like don't go to HomeSense and spend all your money on signs, because you don't need to. Generally, the bride or the groom or whoever is coming to you to do the work, if it's not a wedding, will already know what they want their style to be, and they'll know what they want you to write on. So the easiest thing to do is to just tell them, like, you bring me the sign, I'll write on whatever you want. The downfall to that, obviously, is if they bring you something like a homemade chalkboard, and you tell them, like, well, I'm going to have to damage it to do this. But that it's like so rare, and generally people don't really care if it's a homemade thing like that. They just want you to write it on it for their wedding. So I have, over the years of doing this, I've just gathered some signs that sometimes brides are like, do you want to just keep this because I'm not going to ever use it again? Or if it's a really nice one that I think a lot of people will want to use, like as their own wedding signage later, I ask the bride if I can buy it off of them. So I have maybe like 5 or 6 big signs in my garage. But when I started, I had none. Like I was very strict about, like, you bring me your sign and I'll write on it. But now if somebody wants to rent it from me, I usually do, I think I do $30 a day for a rental. So if you are going to, take it across the world, then it's going to cost you that much. But if it's just for the weekend, it's not that much to add on to your package. Yeah.
So do you normally deliver the signs or have them pick them up, or have you ever shipped any?
I don't ship them. I get a lot of people asking me to do signage and ship it, but the amount of money it would cost you for me to ship you a huge mirror like that, like, it's just not, it's not fair to the client for me to ask them to pay that much for shipping. So I just don't do it. I only do local work. And I don't deliver either. I have it pretty strict in my contract that my prices don't include pickup and drop off. Those are client related things. And if it ever has come to, it's happened maybe twice where the client would prefer that I drop it off, and I just add that into my price. So you just have to be very clear about whether that's included in your pricing or not. If it's something that you're okay with doing, if you have a truck that you want to deliver things, then that you can do that for sure. But generally, once I hand off the sign, it's in their hands. If they damage it, if they scratch the lettering, I kind of tell them, like, care things. If it's oil based, I tell them, like, you can get rid of smudges with your dry paper towel later. But if it's water based, I tell them, like, try not to touch it. If you touch it, like, I'm going to have to come touch it up. But, and that leads me to another thing. Like, I will take a picture of the sign before I give it to them, so that I am able to, like, if they tell me that there was a word smudged, I can zoom in on the picture and say, well, it wasn't smudged when I gave it to you. So, little things that you pick up like that along the way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, since you can't ship all over the world, hopefully now lots of people in our audience have gotten some great tips on how to make signs. So maybe you guys can start looking in your local areas and see if you can help anyone out with signage like this.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Someone wants to know if you have a Facebook group for Show Me Your Drills.
Yes. So I have 2 Facebook groups. One is just called the Happy Ever Crafters, where we talk about any and everything calligraphy and lettering related. And then I have one specific for Show Me Your Drills. So when you sign up at showmeyourdrills.com, you'll get the link to join it. And that's where we share our work and talk about everything the whole semester.
Awesome. Great. And actually, if any of you guys, for those of you who are doing for real calligraphy, how we have all the lessons in Teachable, Show Me Your Drills is set up the exact same way. So you're already going to be familiar with how it's set up and how to find everything.
Yeah, it's such a good platform. This is the first semester that I've put it on there, and it's already so much easier.
Yeah, definitely. Having everything in one place, and also for being able to track your progress as you're going through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, let's do maybe one more question. Someone wants to know, this is a good question, what you would suggest that they use to write on coffee cups.
I use oil-based Sharpies, and but it depends. So on coffee cups, like I really like the look of glass coffee cups, like see-through glass coffee cups. So I use oil-based Sharpie on there, and you can actually bake it on. And I have a tutorial for that on YouTube too, so I don't need to go into too much detail. But basically, if you do that, you write in oil-based Sharpie, you put it in the oven before the oven is hot, and you get like you put it in there so that when the oven starts to heat up, it doesn't crack. It like gradually will get used to the heat. You leave it in. I usually leave it in for about an hour on a low temperature, and then leave it in there when the oven starts cooling down as well. So it's a bit of a process, but that will bake it on a little bit. And I usually, even when I do stuff like that, I tell clients like it's not fully permanent. It will come off after a while. You don't want to put it in the dishwasher. It's a homemade product, so of course it's not fully permanent. But the other option is if you're using ceramic cups, you can also use ceramic paint pens. So they make ceramic specific paint pens that you can bake on, and the instructions are always on those pens. So I think they're, what is that brand called? Pebeo, Pebeo. So they make a ceramic paint pen.
Awesome, thank you.
But yeah, so there is a tutorial on my YouTube channel for writing directly on glasses and mugs too.
And once more, you can find her YouTube at thehappyevercrafter.tv.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming into our group and showing. I know everyone really appreciates all of the tips that you've given. I see lots of thank yous in the comments. Thank you to everyone who joined and is watching live, or if you're watching the replay, we appreciate having you. Yep, I know I personally learned a ton. So again, thank you so much for being here. And anything else you wanted to say?
No, I think that's it. Thanks for having me. I'm glad that people found that useful. I feel like these things, like, you don't realize that they're so like a light bulb moment for people until you teach it, because they're just kind of tips that I've gathered along the way, but all combined, they can really kind of change up your work.
Exactly. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
thanks for having me.
I put the Show Me Your Drills link on the screen once more. If you guys are interested in signing up, it starts Monday. So just head to that link, and we'll talk to you guys later. Bye, everyone. Bye, guys.
Bye.